Hola, good afternoon, and welcome to everyone who is joining to this event, the Europeana Conference under the Portuguese Presidency of the European Union. And we will be talking today about what I consider a very important topic, recovery, and the importance of building capacity for a successful digital transformation of the cultural heritage sector. So, it's warm in here. I'm in The Hague. It's 23 degrees. I think it's, in a way, it's a pleasant experience. It doesn't take a lot of imagination for me to imagine myself in Portugal, in Alfama, perhaps, listening to the sounds of Fado in the background. So, unfortunately, we're not in Portugal, but we'll keep that spirit alive. And I'd like to start today with thanking the National Library of Portugal and in particular, Margarida Lopes. Thank you, obrigado, Margarida, for all the work you've done, and the Portuguese Ministry and the Presidency for their fantastic support. So, the restrictions that we've experienced over the past year have, in my view, been both dramatic and equally insightful. Museums, libraries, and archives became acutely aware of the necessity to improve their online presence. But at the same time, it has also revealed an enormous capacity gap. We've seen that back in many reports. Capacity gaps between institutions who were well equipped for the digital transformation and were able to react very quickly, between countries who were better equipped than others with better infrastructures. And also there was a big gap between citizens and people who felt very connected to the cultural heritage in the way that we present it and those who don't. And I think our job today and tomorrow is to explore together how we can close in on that gap. That's the job at hand. So we'll explore that. We'll explore that gap. I think the main takeaway that I'm looking for is to get more of a shared understanding of what we mean when we talk about capacity building and how Europeana can contribute to that. There's going to be a journey. This is not going to be the end of it. We will continue this after this meeting, of course, in close collaboration with the Europeana Network Association and the Europeana Aggregators Forum. So right now, I think I'll hand over to my colleague, Julia Fannin, who will be our host for these 2 days. Julia.
Thank you, Harry. So welcome, everyone. I think we have a really interesting 2 days ahead of us. Before I sort of dive into the agenda and the programme for the coming days, I'd just like to address a few housekeeping points. You'll have seen through the Zoom interface, this event is being recorded so that we can ensure that different elements, the discussions, the open discussions can be shared again for people who aren't able to join us live, but who are interested in how this discussion and debate evolves. As participants, it's really helpful if you check your username so we know who is in the room. And just a note for those of you attending our public webinar, just such as this, if you're a participant in that, your microphone will be automatically muted. There are 2 ways for you to engage with us. There's through the chat, which is useful if you want to share your thoughts or comments with each other. It's also through the Q&A, if you have specific questions for the speakers or the roundtable or what have you later in the day. Now, we may not get to answer all the questions that come up and that we see, but we will be saving them. So if we don't get to answer them in the sessions you're in, we will collate them and we'll look at how we can answer those in our post-event follow-up in the coming week. And finally, one thing we'd like you to do is to encourage you to actively listen. We know that the past year we've engaged in an awful lot of digital events, and it can be quite challenging to participate in something that happens over 2 days. So at Europeana, we've asked ourselves, how can we support you as participants getting the most from this event? Well, we've scheduled regular breaks. We've thought about how do we interact with you. So myself and my colleagues, we're going to try and keep our interactions during these sessions with you to a minimum. So we're going to not pepper you with links in the chat that are mentioned by the speakers, for example. What we'll do is we'll try to reserve those to the end or the beginning of the sessions and include those in the post-event follow-up so that you can really focus on what is being discussed. So with that in mind, let's move on to the programme. So day one, that's today, this afternoon, we have some really interesting discussions and speakers. We're starting now with our opening keynotes from ministries and invited guests. This is a public webinar, and that will be followed after a short break by a debate, which will include a roundtable discussion with representatives from across the cultural heritage sector on what we mean by capacity building. And we'll be joined by Rihanna to talk about the Recovery and Resilience Fund. Session 2 will be an invite-only workshop where participants will be encouraged to develop a shared understanding of what capacity building means to us. They'll be taken through a series of questions in kind of breakout rooms guided by our expert facilitators. And then finally, session 3, at the end of the day, we'll have a short wrap up where we'll hear from you, and we've got a virtual drink session planned. So more on that for the invited guests a little bit later. And then just to give you an idea about what's happening tomorrow, whether you're part of the invited guest group or the public session, we'll start with an opening and a recap for those of you who weren't able to join us today or didn't manage to catch all of it. That will be followed by some really inspiring case studies about how we see capacity building taking place around us on a global level, all the way through across Europe, in member states, and in Portugal itself. Session 4 will be another invite-only session for our participants to continue their journey through a facilitated workshop, to continue that developing this common approach, seeing what we can find in common around capacity building so we can share our expertise and case studies with each other. And we'll close that with another wrap-up in time for lunch. That leads me to pass back to Harry to introduce our first speaker.
Very good, thank you, Julia. Yeah, I think we're properly warmed up now, ready to get into the substance. And I'm extremely pleased and honored, really, to introduce as our first speaker and some opening words, the Minister of Culture of Portugal, Ms. Graça Fonseca. So she has a pre-recorded video that we'll share with you now.
Dear all, I would like to begin by welcoming you to this conference, which is the result of a partnership between the Ministry of Culture, through the National Library of Portugal, and the European Union, under the Portuguese Presidency of the Council of the European Union. We all recognize the important role culture plays in promoting social and economic cohesion, just as we recognize the very important role that culture can and should play in the recovery of the European economy in the post-pandemic context. As we know, the largest set of support measures ever financed by European budget is underway, with the aim of rebuilding Europe, making it greener, more digital, and more resilient. This recovery process implies solutions that, without prejudice to the immediate needs of supporting the economy and employment, assume a strategic and very important dimension for the future, which will shape Europe for several decades. In the view of the Portuguese government, culture is part of this very important dimension for the future of Europe, and therefore the Recovery and Resilience Plan that we presented to the European Commission comprises a component exclusively dedicated to culture, centered, among other aspects, in the promotion of the digital transition through digitalization of arts, literature, and cultural heritage. This investment in digitalization of our cultural heritage will support the creation of a digital-based network for the circulation of arts and cultural heritage, expanding our potential to reach more people, further promoting social and territorial cohesion. Digitalization of cultural heritage is also a crucial tool in our effort towards the conservation, restoration, study, and promotion of European cultural resources. Museums, galleries, archives, and libraries keep in their holdings our history, our memory, our identity, made of artifacts, documents, drawings, photographs, sound, texts, paintings, and so much more. Cultural institutions and their treasures represent the permanent possibility of rebuilding the human being from their holdings. Therefore, this investment in digitalization will help us preserve our artistic, literary, and cultural heritage for the future, which also improving the public's experience as well as leveraging new business models for authors, creatives, artists, and many more. It is therefore with pleasure that we receive this conference and with great expectation that we await the various contributions that will certainly result from this wide and diverse forum. I also want to take this opportunity to thank and highlight the importance of Europeana and its role as a driving force behind the digitalization and accessibility of European cultural heritage content. As a guardian of more than 62 million digital objects, which corresponds to European cultural heritage assets from the collections of libraries, museums, archives, and other cultural heritage institutions across Europe. Europeana is the largest European cultural collection and thus the great digital and permanently renewed memory of European cultural heritage. I wish, therefore, that the mission and values promoted by Europeana and this conference will continue beyond this event, fostering the permanent reinforcement of digital transition and the paramount role of the cultural sector in social and economic development. Once again, thanks to all who made this initiative possible, and of course, to the National Library of Portugal, the parent library and the memory of the Portuguese culture. To all the speakers, also many thanks and best wishes for an excellent conference. Thank you very much.
Excellent. And our thanks to Minister Fonseca for his inspiring and kind words. I think we're going to hear a lot about the future plans for the Recovery and Resilience Fund over the next 2 days. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Ivo Volman is the Acting Director for the Directorate of Data for DG Connect. Ivo, over to you.
Yes, good afternoon to everyone, and many thanks to Europeana and the Portuguese Presidency for organizing this conference. Actually, this is the second time that Portugal is hosting a Europeana conference. And we're really grateful for the support also of the presidency for this area that's key for Europe's identity. Now, I'm also very pleased to be back in the Europeana community because, well, I feel myself as one of the founding fathers of Europeana. At the time, back in 2006, when we started, and the launch of Europeana was in 2008, I had a director who said, well, if there's one thing in your career you can ever be proud of, that's going to be Europeana, because it's bringing European culture together and European citizens together around the commonalities in our identity. And I am very proud of what has been achieved in the meantime. It feels like a parent seeing the child grow up. So there we go, from 0 items back in 2006 and 2007 when Europeana was not launched, in 2008 with a few 100,000 objects, then 21 million digital objects in 2011, without quality indicators, to what is now 62 million in 2021, with a real strong focus on better quality. This means about 1 digital object for every 7 EU citizens. So also in 2011, the first Europeana data model was published. And during the last decade, it was of course enriched and strengthened, and it's really a standard today. Then also about the accessibility, well, from the first API in 2011, we are now at 8 APIs, APIs that got awards. And then the community itself, starting with a relatively small group, less than 100, we are now at 4,000 data contributors in Europeana. That's impressive. Now, the theme of the conference today is building capacity. And of course, that's very timely because you heard it, the European efforts are now really geared towards rebuilding Europe's economy for recovery and also rebuilding it with better resilience. So I'm going to put this and try and put this in the context of two major policy developments at European level, the digital decade and the data strategy. Now, let me start with the digital decade. That was published in February of this year, and it's about Europe's vision for the digital transformation until 2030. Now, the overall objective of this is to be masters of our future, to be digitally sovereign and in an interconnected world. So what we want to do is to build and deploy our own technological capabilities to empower people and businesses. Now, this means on the one hand, building on our strengths, but also addressing strategic weaknesses and high-risk dependencies. And this vision of the digital decade, it's not a theoretical vision. It comes with a concrete compass for navigation with 4 cardinal points. Those are built around digital skills, digital and secure infrastructures, digitalization of public services, and the digital transformation of businesses. And I think that in all 4 areas, actually, what we're discussing here can be extremely important, and the cultural heritage organizations can have an important role in all of this. So in a nutshell, our ambition is that by 2030, there will be much better connectivity across the continent, gigabit bit speed for everyone. Computing, we want faster computers with quantum acceleration, the first one. 75% of enterprises should have been taking up cloud services and work with big data and artificial intelligence. And for skill, 20 million ICT specialists must be there. And of course, several of them will work in the cultural heritage sector. Now, what is going to be so different in 2030? I think that it's the combination of 3 elements that will fundamentally change the digital landscape in the coming years. And it's, on the one hand, the high-speed connectivity and performance. Secondly, it's going to be the abundance of data, so data availability. And thirdly, better tools and capacity to process this data. Now, what is this going to lead to? This is going to lead to new services in the realm of cultural heritage, but of course, much more broadly. And in the realm of cultural heritage, you can see how 3D is going to take off, how artificial intelligence will play a role, how extended reality is going to play a role. So there will be new services, new products in these areas, and also new immersive experiences of cultural heritage, like virtually visiting museums and sites, not only current sites, but perhaps also sites as they were in the past. Visiting, for example, the Lisbon pre-earthquake, learning the use of a sextant in the Vasco da Gama or Magellan ships, a new ability to touch and interact with the objects from the past, thanks to extended reality. I would call it the zero distance experience of culture, from anywhere, your smartphone, your smart TV, your smartwatch, or virtual reality glasses, you just can name it. You can go back to any time in history, prehistory, the Renaissance, or World War II. Okay, realizing this vision requires the availability of data. And let me say a few words about the data strategy, for which my directorate is also responsible. So the objective of the strategy is to make Europe a leader in the data-driven society and economy. So it's about creating a single market for data that will flow freely between EU member states, but also between sectors. It's also about making more data available in line with Europe's values. Of course, data availability has to go together with a strict respect of our rules on privacy. And last but not least, it's also about having clear and fair access and use rights of data in place. Now, the strategy is highly relevant to the cultural heritage sector, because you have been one of the forerunners, the front runners in making data more widely available. also opening up data for reuse. And we now have a healthy ecosystem in place that we would like to further nurture. And we would like to, well, in a way, turn that into a data space for cultural heritage. So there's this concept of data spaces in the data strategy. It's an important concept. You cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach to data for all the different sectors. You need to also look at the specificities of the different sectors. That's why we have this concept of data spaces. And we see a big role for a cultural heritage data space in the future. Now, what do these data spaces do? They combine infrastructures, data infrastructures, with governance of data. And actually, Europeana is already very strong on both aspects. Think of the long way that we have come to put in place a single data structure and rules for 4,000 cultural heritage institutions in Europe, whatever their size, theme, or language used. I still can remember the interesting discussions between the libraries, the museums, and the archives. And I think we have moved on from those beginnings when the discussions were sometimes a bit acrimonious. So I think you can really be proud of your achievements in this area. So Europeana will be the seat of this cultural heritage data space, and we would see in the future expanded functionalities, high quality content, more 3D models, and a wider reuse of digitized cultural heritage resources, as well as cross-sector and cross-border cooperation. Now, we have been putting a strong focus on 3D over the past couple of years, and we think that 3D is the future of digitization. This is why it is key that institutions contribute to advanced, high-quality 3D models in Europeana. We may have these 62 million objects in Europeana, but only 17,000 are 3D images, and that's less than 0.03%. And many of them are not even real 3D, but PDF embedded images. So we should have many more real 3D high quality models, particularly of anything that's endangered because of natural or actually human hazard. Now, these high quality 3D models will help to preserve digital versions in the event of a disaster. Think of what happened to the Notre Dame, and there wasn't really a good 3D model available. Think about the flooding in Venice or an earthquake in Lisbon. Also, this can be important for intangible heritage, such as the famous Portuguese fado. So with high quality data, our aim is also to stimulate innovation across sectors. Think of the potential of the Europeana material for the tourism sector. We've seen during the pandemic the close economic ties between the tourism sector and the cultural sector, and it's really important to foster more of these synergies. And I was very happy to see that Europeana contributed to the tourism effort with the Discovering Europe campaign last summer. In the context of Reopen the EU initiative. So I also enjoyed reading the series on ecotourism in Europeana, highlighting alternative travel experiences. So data from Europeana with extended reality, artificial intelligence, and other advanced technologies, they can be reused innovatively in many other domains beyond tourism. Education, very important, and you have already an important link with the educational sector. Music and dance, modeling and prototyping, and I could go on. There's also a particularly untapped potential for gaming, actually, something more trivial perhaps, the 3D models that could be interacted with in games and buildings or sites that a player may run into. Now, I would like to add one dimension here, and that is the role of cultural heritage institutions in making trusted content available. So the content available through Europeana is not just anything that you find on the internet, and that's really important. The public can trust the authenticity of the digital objects that come from the cultural heritage institutions. And I think there's a key difference there with a lot of the material you find out there. So to tackle these challenges, high quality data, trustworthiness, innovation using the power of 3D, XR, artificial intelligence. What do we need to do? Well, we will need to develop the digital capacity of cultural heritage institutions to handle these developments. If not, we have a problem in a few years' time. The cultural heritage sector was, of course, hit hard by the crisis. Institutions had to close down for several months, but this is really the moment to build the future and use the investments that the minister referred to through the RF, for example, to get the organizations ready for the digital future. Now, therefore, we think that the next decades, it will be the digital decade, but also the cultural heritage digital decade. So online audiences will be bigger, actually much bigger than physical visits. And I'm not sure that we fully grasp today the impact that technologies such as extended reality are going to have and are going to radically transform the user expectation of cultural experiences. Now, the capacity of cultural heritage institutions to be the masters of their future will depend on accelerating the capacity building, handling these new development. And this is going to be based on investments in human capital, but also robust and performant infrastructures and the overall digitization of the sector. So this is why it's important that Europeana is supporting this transformation, the digital capacity building of the sector. And there you've done a great job already during the lockdown to help cultural heritage institutions go digital. And you should, of course, continue and step up your efforts in this collective endeavor. Now, this is also important because we have to ensure that there is no digital gap in the sector. Two-speed growth, very advanced cultural heritage institutions that go ahead and that would capture everything that the imagination can provide. And then a group of institutions that don't have the money and that don't have the possibilities to invest in the future and that would stay behind. We don't want such a gap to emerge. So what are we doing at European level to help? Well, policy and money, those are the two things basically. On policy, we are soon going to update our policy framework for the sector. It's the recommendation on the digitization and online accessibility of cultural material and digital preservation. So basically we will ask member states to act, to invest, to move in the same direction and in the right direction. Now, several of the challenges that are facing the cultural heritage, they're still present today, like the urgent need to protect and preserve European cultural heritage. But the cultural heritage landscape has changed over the past years, and there's new needs and also new opportunities, I would say, that we should use to further increase the contribution of cultural heritage to European economy. And that would also contribute to a better access, of course, of citizens to Europe's rich cultural heritage. Now, in order to meet that our policy framework is meeting these needs and demands, we are updating the recommendation. That's actually from 10 years ago, the last version. And we're looking at elements such as technological advances, the need to harness technologies like data, 3D and AI, the need for member states to take measures to foster advanced digital literacy and skills, and also the skills, of course, in the cultural heritage sector itself. And obviously, in all of this, Europeana has a key and central role. Now, many of you, I know, have contributed to the stakeholders' input, and I would like to thank all of you for this collaboration. Okay, then money. As you know, we are launching a new set of programs, the Digital Europe program, to accelerate digital transformation. Horizon Europe is the follow-on to Horizon 2020, and it will support research and innovation. And last but not least, the minister referred to it, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which indeed is a massive stimulus package, probably the largest ever. So a majority of the member states have submitted their final plans, and we are assessing them. And some countries are planning a significant investment in tourism and culture. especially in the modernization of tourism infrastructure and the digitization of culture. So the amounts can vary from less than 1% to almost 6% of their total investments. And it's not pocket money that we're talking about. Well, we think that these programs, and we expect that these programs will really contribute to a major transformation of the cultural heritage sector and will bring them fully in the digital age. And Rahana is going to talk more about that later. Okay, so the digital decade, it's about our ambition. It's about our ambition for the continent in 10 years' time. And I would actually like to throw a few questions to you for this seminar, for this conference. And one of them is, well, how do we actually see Europeana in 10 years from now? And what are the key elements to make the initiative more relevant than ever in a society that will be digitally powered? Will Europeana still be a website, or will it have a different form? Let's try to think out of the box. And what could a zero distance Europeana powered initiative look like? And this of course does not only apply to Europeana, it applies to every single cultural heritage institution. So I would like to invite you to reflect, what are you doing now to become zero distance in 2030, and what investments are needed in terms of infrastructures and staffing? Okay, I come to the end of my speech, so let me sum up. First of all, Europeana has been a success. The work done by the foundation and by the cultural institutions is recognized as of excellent quality, and it has been extremely useful for Europe. So please keep up with your efforts. Second, the cultural heritage data space based on Europeana, I think it's going to become a prime instrument for the future of cultural heritage in Europe. And then third, it's the big challenge. We need to prepare for the future. We need to think big, exploit new ways to handle zero distance cultural heritage, embrace innovation, things like virtual reality, visits in cities of the past. And in that way, I think we have a new way to pay tribute to the richness and variety of our cultural heritage. And of course, we have to fully bring this into the digital age. And this is necessary so Europeana can continue to play its key role for European citizens. Many thanks, and I would say enjoy the conference, and very happy to engage in further conversations on this with you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ivo, for that really inspiring speech. It's really lovely to hear your kind and thoughtful words about the development of Europeana and the work that we have undertaken supporting the sector, and also the development of the sector over the years. I think a few things that you've said have struck me. A few of us here at the Foundation have very much enjoyed the perspective that we currently publish one digital object for every 7 European citizens. That's a very nice perspective to bring, so thank you for that. You mentioned that the policies shouldn't leave people behind. I think that gap between the activities of the large institutions and the small institutions is something we're always trying to narrow and see how we can make the knowledge and experience of those larger institutions more accessible for the smaller ones, so that we can all learn for each other. And so actually, I'd just like to remind everyone here that you're going to be hearing from people from across the cultural heritage sector, representatives from institutions, large and small, and networks at the round table later today at 14:35 Central European time. And there are some inspiring case studies that you will hear about tomorrow at 10:15. So once again, thank you, Ivo, for that wonderful keynote. Next, I would like to pass the floor to Maria Cordeiro, Director General of the National Library of Portugal.
Good afternoon. If we were living normal times, I would be welcoming this meeting in Portugal. The pandemic made this impossible, But on the other hand, it fostered some of the topics of this meeting: recovery and digital capacity building in the cultural heritage. We are all, with our governments and institutions, planning for the recovery from COVID-19, and this pandemic is our most recent disruption, but we have seen many others in the last decades. Disruption in technologies and their standards, disruption in users' demands, and disruption in economic conditions, just to mention some of the factors that have a profound effect on the cultural sector. If we know anything, is that more disruptions are yet to come. And disruption and recovery bring about another concept that was already mentioned, that of resilience, the ability to recover as quickly and strongly as possible from any stress, any disruptive factors, whatever they are. Being resilient means capacity to survive, change, and keep growing despite any problems that we found in our way. And nowadays, the capacity of being resilient is strategic to all fields and at many levels, many different levels, that of individuals and their skills, organizations and their management, communities and their driving forces, technological systems and their adaptive capabilities. Because technologies are at the heart of so many changes and are assumed to have quick transformative power, we often tend to see digital transformation as technical matters essentially. But we know that technical matters are only part of it, part of the problem. We all know that sustainable digital transformation goes much deeper than that, and it is more than just adaptation, more than just keeping pace with change around us and our technologies. The rapid evolution of the network has created an environment increasingly complex and systemic, from which a great deal of transformation forces emanate. In order to improve resilience, we need to understand better what capacities we should develop to enable our organizations to take an active part in such an evolution of the systemic environment. And at the same time, reflect the changing characteristics of the environment in the digital transformation of our own organizations, starting with, for example, guiding concepts. What we can learn from the systemic environment is that digital transformation is not self-contained, is multidirectional, is not centric, variable, open to diversity, prone to very rapid changes and self-adaptation, and based upon shared, modular, agile, and easily reconfigurable assets, be them personal skills, organizational models, or physical or virtual resources and services. I believe that this can inspire and prepare us to navigate the sea of systemic changes that are already impacting people, organizations, their governance and services, as well as public policies. I also believe that beyond technology, a great deal of digital transformation is of a social nature and involves social innovation, and especially in the cultural sector, largely populated by highly social institutions. When we look back to European achievements, we can see a very good example of this. It has evolved by gathering a very large and varied base of content providers, by building and offering access services to a massive set of very diversified content for all types of audiences across the entire world. From the strategic and organizational point of view, Europeana has been an excellent environment for us to exercise the social aspects of sharing and learning and, together, making innovation happen. Precisely, Learning together is the purpose of the meeting that we are now starting. So I hope you enjoy it and I wish you success in your debates. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. I think the changing characteristics of our environment that you described is something that we are all relating to very well at this time. I'm going to move over quickly to Harry, who's going to talk a little bit about our capacity building work before our next break. So, Harry.
Yes, thank you, Julia, and thank you, Maria and Ivo, for those very supportive words. And it was great, Ivo, to hear back from you how Europeana built itself up from nothing really, an idea, to what it is today. So what I'm going to do now is I'll share a few things with you, but it's really a way for me to start framing what's going to happen after the break. Well, we'll hear from a couple of panelists how they think about capacity building in this sector. I think one of the things we've experienced at Europeana is that those two words can have many meanings for different people. It can, for some people, it's very related to learning and training, which of course is a core element of it. But we've also heard from Ivo about what he calls policy and money. And I think those are all components to me of capacity building. So what I want to propose to you now is to, as a working definition, use what Wikipedia calls capacity building. And I'll quote, capacity building is the process by which individuals and organizations obtain, improve, and retain the skills, knowledge, tools, equipment, and other resources needed to do their jobs. Now, I think that's a very succinct and simple way to start this conversation, which will undoubtedly become more complex. Now, just to get into this, I want to share some very personal reflections with you on this capacity building from our own organization. So in preparation for this meeting, I was thinking, so what have we learned as an organization in this past year? And I remember very vividly on March the 13th, when we received the announcement from the Dutch government that we were supposed to work from home until further notice. We were in the middle of a board meeting. At the end of the day, it was around 4 or 5, and we were just chatting away. And I had to very quickly decide to announce to all staff at the foundation, mostly, of course, in the office in The Hague, that they needed to pack up, bring their laptops, because we could expect them to work from home for a little while. Now, of course, a little while at that time, we had a very different notion than what we know today. I think we were thinking in terms of 2 weeks, maybe 3. And in the beginning, that's sort of the rhythm that we found. And of course, it ended up being something very, very different. So let me explore a few things with you that happened and that we learned. So, for example, as everyone, we had to very quickly learn to shift to working from home, right? As an organization that was active in the sector, we also had to very quickly stop traveling. We needed to move all of our workshops and meetings to an online first and digitally enhanced environment. And it was no small feat. You may think of us as a very digital organization, but also for us, it was quite a step to really move to online first. So we made some necessary investments in equipment, in tools, and resources. We learned to work with Zoom, Miro later on. We also onboarded about 12 colleagues without even being able to introduce them to the organization, which must have been incredibly hard for them, not to see the body language of Europeana Foundation or the network and still function. And basically, we had to learn to manage an organization from behind a screen, as many of you must have learned. I think it's been hard. And it's been very much harder for some than it was for others. But we also really learned from it. So I'll share a few things with them. So one of them is that we've learned how incredibly important it is to have some really good rules of engagement for online interaction, to learn how to read a room when it's only behind a screen, to be mindful of people's time. That was something that I think took us easily 6 to 9 months in order to master that to some extent. There were some upsides. We are now able to run about 20 events when in the past we could handle only one. And we can reach 10 times more people from all across the world who don't have to travel and who don't have to leave a carbon footprint behind in order to work with us. We've become very much more conscious that it requires communities to make change and that communities need to be nurtured. And we're still learning how to do that best and how to interact with each other in the most useful way. So I think in the last year, we've seen the digital discourse change from what was perhaps largely a question of more resources and technology to a capacity building question, a more human ask, if you want. What does it take to get this sector, to get the people in this sector to make the changes in their own organization rather than it being imposed from above? So perhaps it makes us think a bit differently about digital transformation itself. And we've heard a bit from Ivo how the Commission has woven that concept into their policies and strategies. And I think that's really what we need to explore together, is how we feel about those types of definitions. And I'm not gonna tell you here that we have cracked that we understand what digital transformation is or should be, but we needed to have a working definition in order to progress our work. So and we developed that together with the network, and I want to show you in the form of a short animation what we've came up with. And I'm going to encourage you and ask you to think about it and see how that resonates with you. What are the things that work for you, where you recognize yourself in? And what are the things that perhaps you feel are missing? And we're going to take that further in the next couple of days. So if I could please get our animation up, that would be wonderful.
Digital transformation is both the process and the result of using digital technology to transform how an organization works. It helps an organization to thrive, fulfill its mission, and meet the needs of its stakeholders. Digital transformation can be driven by heritage professionals of any level. Everyone can be an agent of change. It is not just about technology, it's about mindsets and personal capabilities. The impact of digital transformation will be different for each individual organization. Each change, no matter how small, contributes to a cultural heritage sector powered by digital and a Europe powered by culture. Europeana's focus is on digital transformation relating to the digital discovery of cultural heritage collections. This includes, but is not limited to, efforts that help cultural heritage institutions to develop their leadership and capacity for digital transformation, to strengthen infrastructure, improve interoperability, enrich data, share collections, and engage with audiences. Europeana empowers the cultural heritage sector in its digital transformation, helping it to embrace digital change and encouraging partnerships that foster innovation. We lead with our specialist expertise when appropriate and collaborate when that expertise lies in other networks. Do you want to know more about our work? Then go to pro.europeana.eu.
Wonderful. So this was also the first time that we've seen this live. This was really done in the run-up to this conference. So I'm going to ask you, as I would in a physical space, just to take a minute and let this sink in. This video went quite fast. and write down either on paper or maybe you have some journaling that you're doing on screen. What are the 3 things that you took from this video that resonated with you? I'm going to let this pause for a minute. Okay. So it always feels a little awkward. I can't see you or your faces, but I wanted to give you a little bit of time to let these things sink in. Otherwise, these things go too fast. Let me share a few things with you that I took from where we are with this working definition. For me, it's important that we're assuming a couple of principles. First of all, that it's not only about the digital output. Yes, we need big data, we need that output, that's important, but it's as much as about the process of learning if we want to make digital transformation happen. The second core component is that it's not just about technology. I think that came out quite clearly in this definition. It's about mindsets and personal capabilities. How do we use technology rather than the technology we can plug into the systems? What I find very important is that digital transformation can succeed if it's a collaborative approach. Change won't come from the top of an organization alone. We know that, nor from policymakers alone. It needs to be something that comes from the ground up. So that's also where we need to invest resources. And finally, an element that I find very appealing and interesting and important is that it's about small changes as well as big changes. Sometimes small changes can make all the difference. A conversation can actually lead to something really, really big in the end. It's not only about massive digitization. So I'm going to leave you now for a break. We will, after the break, explore with a panel of eminent speakers what capacity building means to them. And we will hear also later on from Brehana Schwinninger-Ladak, the head of unit at DG Connect, what opportunities the recovery and resilience facilities will provide. So please stay tuned, get some refreshments, and Julia, at what time do we expect people back?
Okay, thank you, Harry. We will restart at 14:35.
Very good. Then we'll leave it here. The screen will be on and we'll see everyone back in a couple of minutes. I hope you're all back. There was wonderful music, Fado, to get us into the mood for the next session, which is a panel, a roundtable, where we're going to explore what digital transformation and capacity building means to us. And for starters, let me introduce you to our eminent panelists. We have with us Susan Hazan. She is the chair of the Europeana Network Association. She's formerly senior curator of new media and head of the internet office at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. And she's also a great thinker and writer, and we're really pleased to have her. With her, we have Jonas Heide. He's the head of digital at the Statens Museum for Kunst in Copenhagen. The Statens Museum for Kunst has been a long-time partner of Europeana, and we're very happy to have Jonas with us. Cosmina Berta will be with us. She is the metadata quality project coordinator at the German Digital Library, and she is also a members counselor, a representative of the Europeana Network Association. And finally, but certainly not least, we have with us Alec Tarkovsky. He is a sociologist, an advocate, and researcher of digital society. He is a member of the board of directors of Creative Commons and currently the co-founder of a new organization called Open Future. Please welcome these panelists with us. So let me put my view on gallery. There we are. So welcome everyone. It's great to have you. Let's start this conversation, shall we, by quickly introducing yourself and give yourself a minute to share with our audience what really interests you most in this digital transformation, what most resonates with you personally, on a personal level. And perhaps, Susan, we can start with you.
Okay, thank you, Harry. First of all, I love this introduction. I've never been called a thinker before in my life. I knew I was a curator and a researcher, but a thinker, wow. So I'm going to try and share with you some of the stuff I think about. As a curator, many, many years in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, I directed the digital services, but I was a bit of a troublemaker there because it always worried me that the digital seemed to be a profound affront to the unique and exceptional object, a sort of head-on collision in the making. So that always worried me. And then since I left the museum, I've spent more time with Europeana, and now I make trouble in Europeana. So the sort of things I've been thinking about, then I just very quickly, because I know it's 1 minute, 3 things that I've looked at recently that interest me, and how we can think about what's happening in this process of becoming transformingly digital. And first one is about deep fake and cultural truth. It's very easy to fake now. It used to be about Photoshop, and now it's all about deep fakery and videos. It's incredibly easy. And I would say it's up to the public institutions to be the gatekeepers of cultural heritage in this environment. The custodians of cultural heritage in the age of digital reproduction are those who are the fact checkers of our reality. So these curators, conservators, librarians, educators, it's a tremendous challenge, but only one that can be taken up by professionals to make our cultural heritage truthful and as trustworthy as it gets. I've also looked at big data in the shadow of Black Lives Matter. This has been explosive this year. And looking at the stories we tell in a post-colonial moment and the metadata that describes the stories in our legacy collections in all our museums, libraries, and archives. So I'm looking through the collections and the stories to the code, investigating the code and the biases in the code, and even to the algorithms that drive these actions and also can be polluted with their micro biases. And last but not least, and my favorite, and where I am at the moment, is about mindfulness. My current mode of thinking is about the different ways that cultural heritage can contribute to our well-being, which I think is critical at the moment. We've been denied opportunities to go to museums, theatres, concerts, and most important, not to meet with others. And this year we need to go through a process of healing. And I've been looking at whether digital delivery can support well-being when we experience the world through the screen, the reduction of the screen. So that's what interests me at the moment. I'd like to talk about mindfulness in the context of Europeana later, maybe.
Thank you, Susan. And who could contest that you're a thinker with those big topics that you bring up? Troublemaker, thinker. I think that's a good thing to put on your card in the next round. Thank you. Let's move on to you, Jonas. You're next on my screen. So tell us a bit about yourself and what interests you.
Thanks a lot. It's an honor to be here. Just to introduce myself, well, apart from handling all sort of crises on social media and stuff that breaks down for no reason, what I really should be doing is being in charge of all the ways that our digital services fit together at the museum and all the ways that they meet and benefit users. So I'm trying to be holistic about the museum's broad range of digital services and offers. I'm particularly interested in digital heritage as an sort of kind of open ecosystem of usefulness and understanding. So not so much the cables, not so much the tech necessarily, although I do appreciate a good tech discussion. It's the large picture, it's the ecosystem, it's the way these things can work together. I think art and culture wants to be free and interconnected. I think we're doing, some of us, far too much front end, not enough back end. We can get back to that and why that is. There's a lot of bad strategy and not enough good strategy, which I'm a big proponent. I'm a big proponent of good things. And I think that the recent developments have really made us able to tell the difference between good and bad strategy, which I'll be happy to return to later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonas. And obviously that's something we love to hear a bit more about. Good and bad, good and bad. That's a big theme at the moment everywhere. Cosmina, can I invite you to share your thoughts with us?
My name is Cosmina Berza. I've been working closely with Europeana since 2013 when I started with the German Digital Library. So we go back a long time. And the most aspects that resonated with me, and especially from that video, they are actually concrete aspects. I like to go down to the basics. So data, which is close to my heart, the foundation of all digital things. And the fact that data is the product of many processes. So in order to improve the data and in order to be allowed to dream about what we want to do and what we want to achieve, we have to improve all the processes that lead to it and go deep. So what I'm saying is we should dream, of course, and achieve our dreams, but not forget that there are unsolved problems that we should have to deal with and processes that should be improved at all levels, institutional, personal, and all the enabling levels. And also the constraints. We are faced with a lot of constraints, very practical things. The DDB is very busy with a lot of projects right now, and maybe the most stressful is attracting and retaining personnel. So we need human resources in order to carry out the work, and attracting and keeping personnel is difficult, especially for the cultural sector. So we need help also from the enabling levels, and we need strategies that have to be anchored at national and European level. And also, I'm asking myself, how do we define capacity building? I have been thinking about that a long time in the last week. So there's obviously no correct answer. And in my opinion, there is no single answer. So I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Kuzmina. You're really bringing the very practical aspect, which I think is very important. It's great to have big thinking that Ivo invited us to do, and I think it's critical, but let's not forget the practical aspect, is what you're saying. Excellent. Alex, please tell us a bit about where you're coming from.
Yes, hello, everyone. So for me, there are two. If I had to name one or two things, I would name something very small and very big. The very small things in size, but not in value, are people. And Kuzmina and Susan have already spoken about it, but I think this is crucial in capacity building. And there are all these, what sound by now as sort of repeated all the time, slogans like digital skills and competences. And I know they sound kind of almost boring, but I think they are crucial. In the end, I think the time of the pandemic is also a time where individual effort, individual, devotion to work, to a mission was just crucial, and often lifted organizations that otherwise faced really difficult challenges, for instance, lacking necessary infrastructure. So humans are crucial. Polish Nobel Prize winner Olga Tokarczuk speaks about tenderness, and I think this is also interesting. We can go beyond language like skills and really talk about caring about each other, also in institutional settings. But the really big thing for me is infrastructures. And I appreciated Ivo Volman speaking, for instance, about connectivity. But I think we need to go beyond that. I think connectivity is by now a very traditional idea about infrastructure. We know we need to be connected. Portugal just got connected with Brazil with the transatlantic cable. Amazing. But the really modern infrastructures are public platforms, I think. And here Europeana is sort of the grandmother maybe, or mother of these platforms. It's really a unique case that we do have a European platform. And I'm happy it's in the cultural sector, but we need a lot more. We need platforms for media, for networking. And I imagine them, at some point, public libraries were really this amazing thing happening around the world. We need, of course, still libraries, but I think we also need to imagine these new public institutions. And I think this has to be these big European level infrastructures that will give us really spaces to do our work online.
Thank you, Alex. You're always so well articulated. I appreciate it. And I know you're doing some really interesting work at the moment around digital public spheres and spaces. And perhaps we have a chance to come back to that later on. Okay, thank you for everyone for that quick introduction. I think we get a feel for where you stand in the room. There are practical aspects, there are moral aspects, ethical aspects to be considered. There are big, bad and good strategies, and the need for strong infrastructures and the human aspect of that, I think, are the things that I took out of these very first encounters with you. So let's dig a little deeper in this capacity building notion, right? And perhaps, Cosmina, I can start with you. You've given us the practical view on things. Can you tell us a bit as an aggregator? You work with Europeana, you have a critical role in Germany. How important do you think capacity building is in your area, in your sector? How much is the need? How big is that need?
Well, capacity building has always been important, but I think now that in COVID times, we started to realize how important it is. And it implies a context. And what I want to say is that we are diverse, and diversity in Europe and overall is what defines us. So capacity building implies a broader political and social and regional context. There are various approaches that best fit an institution, and other approaches that fit another institution. And as aggregators, we are in very close contact with institutions and our intermediate aggregators. And the role of the aggregators in this context could be to gather the problems and cluster them and recognize pattern problems, and based on those, look for solutions. Capacity building is a very long process, and you build and then you develop, and you develop a constant interaction. I think the constant interaction with all the stakeholders is crucial here. And one last point I want to talk about is what I perceive as a communication problem, or maybe better said, an unused opportunity. Because we get a lot of information from Europeana downwards, and we give back a lot of information to Europeana, which is great. What I am missing is the horizontal communication between the players, between the aggregators. I think this would be a good opportunity to use. Understood.
That's a good takeaway, and I know you've been very active in the Common Culture project that aimed to do some of that knowledge sharing transversally. And it's absolutely something we could.
This is exactly when it started to happen, and it had an excellent positive impact. This was a great project that allowed us to learn a lot about ourselves.
Well, perhaps we can find some more opportunities with the recovery funds, for example, to do more of that. We'll talk about that later. Susan, could I come back to you? You raised a couple of really interesting and big, hairy project issues, if you want. A bias in AI, mindfulness, all these type of things. Could you tell us a bit more about how you feel that communities could help shape that debate and learn from each other, so the peer-to-peer side of things? And I know you have some ideas about that.
Yeah, I'm extremely proud of the work that the communities in the Europeana Network Association have done, particularly in this last year when everybody has been home and sort of in shock, like housebound, and needing to work, needing to communicate, and trying to find ways to make those that communication. But I just want to make one point before I start. We keep talking about digital transformation, and I think we're in a post-digital transformative moment. We've all had to go digital, whether we wanted to or not. And the trouble is, not everybody was capable of making that transformation. And there's been a lot of cracks in society, and the transformation and the need to go online has highlighted these cracks a lot. So we have a lot of work to do there. But just one small scenario, if you think about people being at home and wanting to connect and being part of continuing with their life as well as they can, you can have a family with 2 adults working from home, 2 kids being homeschooled. That's already 4 computers. Do you have enough bandwidth? How do you spread your resources around? We've looked at this in so many different ways in the communities, and trying to do some outreach to people who are at home and who are dealing with meetings with kids jumping on laps and cats climbing on the screens and things like that. But basically, we're continuing with the efforts that we believe in, and that's sort of upskilling our professionals who are in the sector through online meetings, opening up resources, putting them online, sharing with them, supporting, collaboration, cooperation. This is very much about a people-to-people skill. It's soft skills.
Yeah.
And this is where the mindfulness comes in. We care about people who are active, and sometimes remotely active, and sometimes lonely, and sometimes totally overwhelmed. And I think this is a time for the interaction of mindfulness. So that's something we're working on a bit.
Good.
Would you like to hear more about the communities? Come back later.
Yeah, I would like to hear a little bit more about the communities, but let's come back to that, Susan.
Yeah.
Perhaps I'll jump to Jonas now. You work in one of your country's big museums, most eminent museums. How does digital transformation work in your organization on the ground and capacity building?
In 1,000 different uncoordinated ways sometimes. But I would like to think that just to say that I think we've just been through one of the most interesting periods and events in sort of digital museum history in a very long time. The lockdown. It occurred on the day of me going on parental leave. So I was watching museums lock down and starting whatever they were doing instead. On the same day, I was watching this online, and it was extremely interesting. It was really like a test and a sort of their inner selves kind of showed in a new way. And I think the next interesting event will of course be the reopening, because what will happen? Will we have learned? Will we build on those lessons? Obviously, we've made progress in terms of now we can actually do Zoom conferences. Now we can do lots of things, maybe even stream an event from the museum. But will we just snap back to normal as fast as we can? I think there's a big push towards just getting back to pre-pandemic life, right? So I think there's a really interesting situation here about sort of maturity and our ability or inability to hold on to the stuff that we have learned in this period.
Right.
And I think that a lot of it, as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of it is related to the idea of strategy, which sounds boring, but some strategies just turned out to be useful and some did not. And it was a very interesting test of that aspect of our organizational lives. And of course, one of the things that we can stress about strategy is that it makes me sound old and very mature, but strategies that kind of understand the need to think long-term, right? To do really boring long-term things, really adult things like databases, all these kinds of things that are not interesting, not flashy, which absolutely gave 0 points from politicians and most other people during the pandemic. Are you able to maintain your focus on the back end as well as the front end? Obviously, I think it's a very interesting question. So I think books should be written, papers should be written, conferences should be held about the lockdown, the reopening, and the stuff that has been going on for the last year, because I think it's been very revealing.
Absolutely, and thank you. And I see eyes light up in several ways here. I think Susan wants to keep on thinking and writing articles about this. I'm sure that you will. And I think, Kuzmina, you'll hear, this will resonate with you, right? The back end. Let's not forget about that back end problem that we have. We hear talks about moving to 3D. I think that's important. I see that vision, but it cannot mean that we forget about the things that we're working on before, right?
Exactly. I mean, as I said, data is the product of many processes. So you have to go back and deep and see what's not working right. And we have seen a lot as aggregators, data in various formats, from delivered through an interface, or somebody coming around with a hard disk or with a CD. We have seen it all. So, and I was talking about clustering problems, and one of them is this kind of problem. And I also want to say the German newspaper, The Zeit, said that COVID turned us into lonely residents of a digital world. So I think we learned to communicate digitally. We got very, very good in that, but we lost, I think, and that sense-making workshops that you organized, that was very, very useful for all involved. So I think we lost a little bit of a personal touch to our development and our interactions. So I think we have to combine both and take the both of both worlds, because this is what brings us further, I think. Many things get solved via Zoom, but many things get solved through one-to-one or, I don't know, personal meetings.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yes, I think this question of the post-pandemic moment, no matter whether we're already in it, hopefully, or soon will be, this is the time to plan it. And I agree with Jonas, it's a matter of strategy. There's a study done by my former organization, Centrum Cyfrowe in Poland, on how the institutions and their workers function in the pandemic. 80%, amazing number, did something new online, right? This is really a moment where they stood up and understood this new reality. But when you look at their practices, most of them, all they do is Zoom and email. For me, imagine, you know, we have a workshop like this, but you're not going to use Miro in a moment to do a good online workshop because you don't know how to use it, or you don't use cloud solutions to share files. To me, that sounds like complete hell. I don't know how that works. So what I think this research shows is, yes, we are digital, but in some completely improper, not sophisticated, and very burdensome way. And the way out of it is, you know, like it will not work on its own. I think this is the reason people, you're right, immediately snap back to the previous you know, mode. I really like this concept. It's called hybrid mind. It comes from people thinking about how children are educated, and they say we cannot get away from digital, but we need to balance this with a really good share of high quality offline world, forests, for example, parks. And I really like this language, hybrid. I notice also that in business, there's now a lot of talk about hybrid. So I like this language. And I think hybrid means, you know, you're finding some balance, like not getting rid of the digital, but combining it. Of course, it all sounds very nice, but you know, the moment, for instance, you try to do an event that's both online and offline, or an exhibition that's both online and offline, I think you'll realize costs mount, skills needed mount, staff needs mount. So it's probably not that easy, but I hope my bet on this strategy would be to make it hybrid.
Hybrid's the word, yes. And
for me, yes.
Yeah, I agree. I think what becomes really clear is that we feel that we're in a moment, right? We're at the end of something, at the beginning of something new, and perhaps we're a bit fearful that we might lose the good things that we've also built up, and we're not sufficiently transitioning into something new, meaningful, humane, and positive. I'd like to read out a question that we got from the audience, and I'll invite any of you to react to that. So I'll read out the whole question. Here it goes. We've created a huge divide between people that have been able to transform with us into the digital sphere and those that have been left behind. Fixing these so-called cracks, this divide can't simply be done with mindfulness, but requires structural and radical support. How do you plan on reaching those left behind in the shift to digital? Does anyone want to react?
I think there's also context related, because there are so many specific context, and what we need to avoid is offer generic trainings, for example, that are supposed to solve all the problems and bring everybody to the same level of skills. This will not work. I think we will have to analyze the contexts and address them separately with solutions that fit to the concept, to the context. And also, I think we need strategies that are anchored at national and European level. I don't know if you want to talk about this now or later, about these resilience and recovery plans, but I looked through them, and I was in some of them, I was completely missing the word culture or cultural heritage. In some of them, I found the issue, the topic immediately, but in some of them, which was really worrying for me, I didn't find the word culture. So how can you address problems at the lower levels if they're not anchored in a coherent strategy at European and national level? Yeah. So we have to harmonize this in order for it to work.
I agree. Jonas, you want to reflect on that?
I don't want to come off as a silly optimist here. This is a serious forum, but I think for us at least, what we have been offering for centuries is a fantastic analog experience for those able to travel to a certain place in the world and pay quite a lot of money to get in. So I think definitely for us, digital, and specifically during the pandemic, was a widening of possible audiences. So far more people have enjoyed access to our content. So I think first and foremost, digital during the pandemic for us has made it possible for far more people in the country to enjoy their heritage. Is there still people being left out? Absolutely, of course, but compared to pre-pandemic, pre-digital, it's far more accessible. Just wanted to footnote that.
Yeah. Interesting observation. I think it would be hard to deny that that's true, and yet you could also argue that in a digital environment, divides will be there as well. And I think when we move to digital, it's also important to take those divides.
Work is never done.
Yeah, and also I think the more we go into digital, even in this hybrid model, the more we need to care about those left out. For me, well, I think I felt it a lot more with regard to education, where I really felt the time of the pandemic really opened some sense of digital exclusion that I haven't felt, and a lot of people in like digital policy field didn't address. I know Poland is sort of we're around the average or just below it in Europe, and I think the situation is very different, and also the feeling around inclusion in Denmark probably, and in countries like Poland, I would say there's still significant work to be done, and could really feel it that we honestly stopped talking about issues like infrastructure, and we said it's okay, but then you find out that children cannot take part in lessons because they do have a computer, but they run out of, for instance, their data packets. Of course, education is obligatory, and participation in cultural events kind of not, though it should be, but I think it's the same challenge. So but I agree also with you, Jonas. I think the scale at which it equalized access allowed people to reach, basically across space, right? From small towns, from villages, or access content in other countries, that has been amazing.
Okay, and perhaps indeed, the recovery funds, they hold a lot of promise, right? There's a promise in there that needs to be unpacked, and it's unclear at this moment whether that will really benefit everyone equally. That's for someone to figure out. Susan, you have something to share.
Yeah, I want to go back to this hybridity, because I think this is the key for at least the next few months, if not years. There's actually a lot of resistance to going back to work in certain sectors. I'm not talking about the museum, because I think the museums and galleries are in a different category. But people who are working behind a screen all day in their office, and they can give their services from the home equally to go into the office. And there's a lot of resistance about them going back to work, and to like a 20-minute or 2-hour commute in the morning and back again at the end of the day, where they can do exactly the same, have the same impact by staying in their own home and the comfort of their home. And what they're missing, obviously, is the social aspects of work, and the cup of coffee around the water cooler in the morning, and perhaps the positive side of the journey in the morning. But I think many businesses are turning to this hybrid model, so that they're 2 days at home and then 3 days at work, or whatever it is. And that's becoming quite an interesting solution, I think.
Yeah, indeed, that's for the next couple of months, including our organization, one of the big topics. I would argue that some forms of problem solving and creative work would also benefit from some physical presence. Miro boards set aside, I think that there's still some real value there. I've got another question from the audience. I think, Alec, I'll ask you to reflect on that first. It goes like this. the value of data is becoming a key asset, not only for innovation, but also in regards the access to audience and new markets. Could you please elaborate more on the value of data?
Well, I think at a Europeana conference, this value of data is really known. And again, I really think, you know, when we now have a conversation about European sort of data-driven economy, but also society, I think we can point back to Europeana and say that you got it as an institution quite a while ago to understand that it's really data flows that fuel at European level, you know, communities, infrastructures, institutional cooperation. So I don't think a lot more needs to be said. I think what is important that we need to think, you know, the big data slogan says it's just about scale, let's use more data. But I think we're at a time when there's a lot of conversation whether it's used appropriately. And a lot of the uses are clearly inappropriate. And I think what's the role of public cultural institutions is to show appropriate use. So not jump on a bandwagon and say, you know, give us the hose with data and we also want to learn how to just, you know, suck in as much as we can, but rather how to be respectful basically of users while still being effective. It can be done. I think one of the cool news stories from last year was one of the Dutch public broadcasters figured out it can get independent from one of the, I think it was Facebook's sort of commercial infrastructure for advertising and marketing and all the data sharing.
Right.
And they're still doing fine. They're thinking about building their own system, which, by the way, I think this is part of what I was saying. This is the kind of infrastructures I think we need. But of course, this is easy to say, but hard to do in a reality where, let's face it, most of the cultural institutions don't know how to work with data. You know, if they don't use cloud solutions, they probably don't look at their statistics, the even basic ones. So that's kind of a question. How do you get so sophisticated while mainstreaming even these basic capacities? I think that's hard, to be honest. Something to figure out.
So you could say that's quite a capacity gap we have in our institutions, I would say. Yeah. Somebody at a conference the other days mentioned the word data obese at the moment, sort of so obsessed with sucking up data, like you said. It's actually unhealthy. It's maybe not about getting more data, but getting good data and being responsible with it. Very interesting idea. Yeah. Very good.
Can I add something to it?
Sure.
What I wanted to say is that data is not valuable per se as data. Data serves a purpose, and among others, information. And I think we are still trying to define the purpose here. When the DDB was set up, it was only data. You need to deliver data and amounts. And we became obese, as you say, Harry. So then we moved to quality. Okay, is it data quantity is okay? This is what we're measured by still, but how good is the data? How good should the data be? And this is almost a philosophical problem that we're getting confronted with. And then if the data is good, what purpose it serves? And I think we're still finding ourselves or looking into this for answers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Big questions to address, and we need to think about how we can address that in the context of Europeana. Also, we can't do everything. We need to figure out with our communities how to deal with it. Let me ask you one more question from the audience, and then we'll move on to talk about recovery, the recovery facility. So there are many questions that we can't unfortunately answer all of them now. So the one I'll take now is the following. How do you look upon the difference between digital capacity on an organizational and on a personal level? Does this possible difference require a different approach? So we're talking about capacity, organization, or personal. Interesting question.
I can quickly answer, though I feel I've been saying a lot, but I really like it because it makes me think you can draw a typical 2x2 diagram that's very useful, and you have this scary situation where there is both institutional and human lack. you have the great situation where there is no lag, but the two other ones are really interesting. I think that's what I was saying at the beginning, a scenario where you really have weak institutional capacity and it's these amazing humans sort of pulling it off anyway. It's a very interesting scenario that I sort of faced as an activist trying to work with institutions. You often find your one change maker, and it's a huge question how to support them. My feeling is individual change makers often don't manage to change institutions. So I think the strategies should be institutional in the end.
Very good. I think I would support. I think we've seen also that who were the organizations that were very successful in this past year. Very often you would be able to liaise that back to one single person, right? Who came up with a brilliant social media campaign or something else. That person leaves, then your whole institutional knowledge is out of the door. Yeah. Okay, I'd like to thank you all very much. This was incredibly interesting. Susan, Jonas, Cosmina, Alec, we hope to continue the conversation somewhere else. But thank you for now for joining us. That was really brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. That brings me to the next presentation that we'll have from our colleague Rihanna Schöninger-Ladak, who's the head of unit Interactive Technologies, Digital for Culture and Education of DG Connect, who's going to talk about some opportunities. Rihanna, are you online?
Hi there, I'm online.
Hello.
Hello, Harry. Do you have my slides? Yep, so that's fine. Great, thank you. So first of all, I'd like to say, good afternoon to everyone. And I hope that you are all well and safe and soon to begin your summer holidays in a few weeks. Now, for some reason, I've lost you. Okay, I'm back. So I'd like, first of all, to really thank European Foundation and our Portuguese partners, the Ministry and the National Library. So dear Maria Inés, dear Margarida, thank you very much for e-hosting us. I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person really soon. So Harry asked me to talk to you about the funding opportunities for digital capacity building, the money, as Eva would say. And Alek Tarkowski mentioned tenderness. So allow me to speak about the tenderness of money, which nonetheless is quite useful. Now, some of the opportunities that I will be presenting to you, I mean, very quickly, because it's 20 minutes. Some are known to you because they are in the logic of our past programs, and some are really new features that come with really enormous opportunities. So I'd like you to run you through these various opportunities, of course, without boring you to death. Otherwise, just have a cup of coffee, of black strong coffee, and it will pass. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So very quickly, by way of introduction, what I would like to say is this is, in a simple slide, the architecture. So on the right side, you have the usual multi-annual 7-year-long EU budget that in general, the Commission for all the direct funding we write, and where we have work programs which are either yearly or 2-yearly that we do, with programs such as the Research and Innovation, the Horizon Europe, the Creative Europe program, and new programs such as the Digital Europe program or the New Health program, for instance. And on the left side, you have the next generation EU funds, which are new ones, and where I speak more about the Recovery and Resilience Fund, and this is really to support the impact, mitigate the impact of the pandemic, and which has a different timeline than the multi-annual EU budget. And below, of course, you have the safety net that was adopted by the EU immediately during the pandemic. So if we go to the next slides, here you can see in this slide all the various instruments, because there are a number of them that are part of the next generation EU. And the one I will be zooming in is going to be the recovery, the resilience and the recovery and resilience facility, which is obviously the biggest in many ways, with 560 billion euros, and whose purpose is to offer financial support for investments and reforms. I'll come to it, including in relation to green and digital transition, as well as the resilience and the rebound of the national economies. In this, how to say, package of funds, we also have REACT EU, which is an important fund for the for assistance for cohesion and territories of Europe. So it is really a cohesion, territorial cohesion fund, where there will also be a lot of money. It's something like 47.5 billion. So it's going to be also an important measure to support the recovery. Now we go to the next slide. So the recovery and resilience facility. So allow me to use the acronym RRF because it's easier. So as I just mentioned, it's really it's the biggest. Huh? It's 560 billion. It's the biggest fund ever. As a comparison, Horizon Europe is 95 billion. Digital Europe will be 7.5 billion. And the regional funds are around 274 billion. So really the RRF offers really untapped potential. Oh, it's massive. Now, what is important here is that the RRF is it's embedded in the European semester, which is a well-established framework for policy coordination at EU level, and it gives country by country the economic situation and outlook, and relevant country-specific recommendation in a number of areas, such as labor market reforms, the skills level of the population, particularly digital literacy, or improving public finances. So this recovery and resilience, the plans, the national plans, they will become the main reference document for member states' forward-looking initiatives. And of course, the mechanism, it's based on grants or loans, where the Commission raises money on the market and then loans to member states. Now, how does it work? So if we can go to the next slide. So the first important aspects is that the RRF will support investments and reforms. So it's not only about injecting money, it's also about creating the framework conditions, the necessary conditions in lasting positive impact on the economy and society. And the measures are there to address the challenges that have been identified in the context of the European semester. So the way it functions, as you can see here, is really that the member states submit what plans. The Commission then has 2 months to assess them, and then once we have assessed them, we publish the official assessment, and then we release the pre-financing, and then there are payments in installments that always assess against milestones and goals that are met. And the timeline is up to mid-2026 with a number of reporting that are done. We are right now, in a very intense phase because we are assessing the national plans. We have received a lot of them. We have received 18 of them. Sorry, 19. And we are looking into them, but I'll come to it. And obviously, as I said, it's the RRF should support a number of objectives, and 2 of them are really important, which are the climate transition and the digital transformation. And for that, there are thresholds. So 37% of the money will go into climate transition, and 20% should go into digital transformation, while addressing the country-specific recommendations. And if you go to the next slide. Now, in terms of digital, so the Commission has given a number of recommendations and has encouraged member states to include in their investments and reforms a number of areas. And you can see on the left side, you have all the areas in relation to connectivity, skills, the human capital, the investments in technologies, in R&D, or the e-government part, so the digital transformation, the digitalization of public services, digitalization of businesses, the investment in capacities and digital capacities, the connectivity, and of course, greening the digital sector. And on the left side, you have what we call the flagship areas. There are also 7 of them, and they will contribute to the different priorities that you see. So if I take, for instance, reskill and upskill, which is about digital skills. So this flagship will contribute to a number of priorities that can be, for instance, human capital, but it could also be digitalization of businesses, of public services, of education. So they are interconnected while having really a clear target. Now, if we go to the next slide. So as I said, we are right now, we are assessing the plans that have been submitted to us officially. So since last autumn, we have been looking at all the draft plans and providing guidance. So indeed, as Cosmina, I think she was saying that we didn't find a lot of cultural heritage. Well, it depends on member states. Huh? So we've been encouraging member states to really invest in the modernization of culture, of cultural institutions, infrastructures, in the modernization, in the digitalization of cultural heritage. But at the end of the day, it really depends on the member states' decision in relation to the country-specific recommendations that they have. So we have been looking at these plans, we have been commenting them, and now we are assessing 19 of them. And we have 2 months to issue. Now, obviously, as we are in the process, I cannot disclose what's in it, but I just can give some pointers. So overall, what we see is that the threshold of 20% is going to be achieved. So we will be we will get there. We might even exceed that. So it's really good. The majority will be for grants as well. That's what member states have been asking. The digitalization of public services will be clearly one of the big, pillars that will be receiving the RRF money. And that is across the board for all member states. So we have the public services and areas of public interest. We have then human capital, so a lot in skills building at all levels, be it for basic digital skills, be it for advanced digital skills, be it for the youth, be it for public service. I mean, you really have a very important investment by governments in human capital, and I think that is really good. And of course, of digitalization of businesses that have been hit quite hard. For cultural heritage, or for culture in general, now it depends really on countries. What we see is that the countries that depend a lot on tourism and culture evidently are investing in those areas. Some others much less. Some others will be investing much more in reforming the public service. So really, it depends a lot as well on their economic situation and the country-specific recommendation. So this is for the Recovery and Resilience Fund. So here, my message would be really, please check in your for your countries what is in there. Many plans are public, and where you can see how the member state has what are the plans. I hope that for the next conference, where we will have made all the assessments, they will be public. We will be able to present a more, a summary of the different investments by member states, specifically in culture and tourism, because they are linked actually. But right now we are in that process, and we should be done by the end of summer and approve all the plans. So then we can pay the member states, and they can start injecting that money in the different economics and social sectors. So that was for the RRF. Now, I'd like quickly to also cover the other possibilities that you have in terms of support to the digital capacity building. So if we can go to the next slide, which is about the direct EU funding. So this is the usual funds that the European Commission manages on behalf of the Union. And I'd like to cover three of them. The first one is Horizon Europe, and for Horizon Europe, it is in the continuation of H2020, in the sense that it will fund research and innovation for the different sectors. Digital Europe, which is the first program dedicated to the deployment of technologies and digital capacity building. And Creative Europe, which is mainly targeted towards cultural and linguistic diversity, as well as boosting the competitiveness of cultural and creative industries. I continue with the next slide, which is about Digital Europe. So Ivo mentioned this. So the Digital Europe program has not been published yet by the Commission. We are finalizing it, so it's going to be in autumn. So our overall plans are, so this is still to be finalized. We're still in the last mile. So please take it with a disclaimer. So our objective is to foster a data space for cultural content, where Europeana will play a central role. And we want to take Europeana to the next level, as well as support thereby the digital transformation of the heritage sector. And for that, we will be investing, supporting all the different components that you mentioned, which is, of course, it's data. I agree, it's not about data obesity, absolutely not. That is not the objective, but it is how, with high quality data, we are able to foster reuse and the creation of new services, new content, new experiences for citizens. It's about reinforcing the platform that we have, so it can handle more functionalities, it can have better aggregation tools. It's about expanding the community and the network. Ivo said that indeed there has been a lot of work in the past 10 years, and we really want to strengthen that community and the network, so they can really continue and build the initiative. The same thing about standards. So Ivo spoke about 3D. I know that it's not only about 3D, but there will be a focus on 3D because it's one of the technologies that allows us to capture in the most comprehensive manner the different cultural heritage assets. And it's about digital capacity for cultural heritage institutions, because of course, as the panel said, you cannot speak about data, you cannot speak about advanced technologies if we don't speak also about skills, about processes, about connectivity, and about ways of handling, about the knowledge. So the digital capacity for cultural heritage institutions is in a way a preconditions to make all this happen. So the work program will be published either by summer or just at the end of summer. So we'll of course we'll keep you posted. We can go to the next slide. Horizon Europe. So in Horizon Europe is the program is structured in many clusters. So the one which is of interest to you is cluster 2, which will support a culture, creativity, and inclusive society. So so we have just learned, that is really latest news, that the work program will be adopted hopefully on 11th June. And it will be published around 11-12 June. So the first calls will open end of June. So as soon this is published, of course, we will let you know. It's going to be on Twitter, on our website. But you can already start checking around the 11-12 of June when this will be online. And the cluster 2 will provide opportunities, obviously, for research and innovation in developing technologies for better preserving and better protecting cultural heritage, technologies such as AI, such as 3D, such as data technologies. It will also provide opportunities for community building and for capacity building. That is an inherent part of the cluster. Go to the next slide, and then I'll be finishing with this one, which is about Creative Europe. So Creative Europe is handled by my colleagues in DG EAC. And what I wanted to say, because the work program is published, so can you really have access to it. The Creative Europe program, the work program for 21-22 will also provide opportunities for capacity building. So you can see here on the slide you have 4 big pillars, and one of them is really dedicated in supporting networks that represent the cultural sector and the capacity building. And specifically for heritage professionals, there will be specific lines of action that will allow you to strengthen either the engagement part in cultural heritage or the digitization aspects in relation to the use of technologies. And I think that with this, I will end my presentation. So I had 20 minutes, and I'll be happy to take your questions if there are any.
Thank you, Rehanna. Let me start with that. I think that was very insightful. So maybe we'll wait for a few minutes to see if we get some questions. I've got one for you.
Sure.
All right. So the RFF is now, you've got 19 of those proposals.
Yes.
Some of them, I understand, are already public, so can be read and seen, and we can already investigate what the opportunities are. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, yeah. Many of them are public, so you could actually go and see them. What has been submitted to the Commission, and but you will have to wait for the Commission's assessment. Because there might be some issues, you know, and we, of course, we check the target, we check the milestones and all that, and we give a kind of feedback where the member state will have to work on that. But the way they have been submitted, many of them are public. Yeah. So you can already identify those opportunities.
And where can we find that?
I think if you Google them.
Yeah. There's no central place. Is there no central place, Rehanna, at the Commission where you assemble these things?
Yes, we have a DG, which is called DG Recover. Mm-hmm. And DG Recover, normally if on DG Recover's website, you should be able to see what is there. I can look for I can put in the chat later on the various links, absolutely.
I think that would be useful, thank you. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Susan already posted it, Susan Hazan, in the chat, so we're good. Okay, well, these will be exciting times. We'll wait for the June 10 and 11th, also for the new opportunities in Horizon. Very interesting. I don't think I see any other questions. Oh, I've got one. I'm going to read it out. When it comes to the renewed Horizon 2020 calls that will hopefully go live mid-June, do you have any insight into what types of proposals the EC will be interested to receive this time around?
I wish.
What topics are you most interested in? That's what it is.
I wish I were able to answer to that question, but you still have to wait for another week, and then you can see what are the calls. Understood.
Okay, Rehanna, thank you so much for sharing this with us. I think we'll, after the break, we'll be in a closed session where more conversation will be had about this. Perhaps, Julia, you want to tell us what's next? It would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That was a really interesting session. Okay, so thank you to all of our participants who have joined us in the webinar today. This is the end of the public session. Next up, we will be moving with our invited guests to a closed session, a closed workshop, where we will discuss and develop some more ideas around what capacity building means to us. And I think you've probably had a lot of ideas that you'd like to take forward in some of those discussions. So I'd like to invite you to take a short break and rejoin us at a different link in 5 or so minutes time. You'll find that link in your program that was emailed to you on Friday. It's titled A Personal Link. So thank you very much, and I shall see you in a few minutes.